The Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp is considered the largest and deadliest extermination camp in the then German Empire. Approximately 900,000 of the deported people were killed in the gas chambers immediately after their arrival. As camp doctor at Auschwitz-Birkenau, Josef Mengele was involved in the selection of incoming prisoners for almost 2 years and sent tens of thousands of people to their deaths, while also overseeing the carrying out of the gassings. Mengele carried out cruel medical experiments on thousands of people, most of which ended in the victims' painful deaths. He particularly targeted children, twins, and people of small stature. For example, the camp doctor infected his victims with deadly diseases such as typhus or pneuma and left them to die in agony. He amputated limbs of fully conscious people or removed entire organs, and even killed survivors so that they could be examined afterwards. Mengele also implemented cruel methods of forced sterilization to wipe out entire ethnic groups not accepted by the Nazis. He had a particular interest in creating Aryan people. He injected people with brown eyes with chemicals to turn them blue, which often led to blindness or outright death of the victims. There is hardly anyone whose list of crimes is longer than Josef Mengele's, which are extensively examined in this video. Josef Mengele was born on March 16, 1911 in Günzburg, a small town in Bavaria. His father, Karl Mengele, was an influential owner of an agricultural machinery company that would later employ over 2,000 people. Josef Mengele was described as smart and ambitious even as a child. After passing his high school diploma, he began studying medicine at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. At the beginning of 1933, the NSDAP under Adolf Hitler took power in Germany, and a major change also took place at the universities. Science and teaching were increasingly influenced by the racial ideology of the National Socialists. After passing his physics exam, Mengele studied anthropology and researched various racial ideological topics. In 1935, he received his doctorate with a dissertation on the racial morphology of the anterior part of the lower jaw in 4 racial groups. In this work, Mengele wanted to prove that conclusions about a person's ethnicity or race can be drawn from the lower jaw bone. However, subsequent investigations have shown that the methodology used and the results are not scientifically tenable, and his research should be viewed as pseudoscience. As part of his state examination, Josef Mengele took up an assistant position at the University Institute for Genetic Biology and Racial Hygiene in Frankfurt am Main at the beginning of 1937. There he met his future mentor, the institute director Ottmar von Verschuer. Von Verschuer was one of the leading racial biologists during the Nazi era and provided the National Socialists with scientific legitimacy for their racist ideology through numerous works and research. In addition to the area of hereditary diseases, the university professor also researched the possibilities of forced sterilization for racial hygiene in accordance with the Nuremberg racial laws, and, by 1940 at the latest, openly spoke out in favor of the forced sterilization of unaccepted ethnic groups. For the next 3 years, Josef Mengele was heavily involved in von Verschuer's research and quickly became his favorite student. The time at the institute was formative for Mengele's later crimes. Many of the human experiments carried out in Auschwitz were based on topics from that time, such as forced sterilizations or twin research. In order to gain career advantages, Josef Mengele joined the NSDAP on April 1, 1938, and shortly afterwards the SS. However, overall he was hardly politically active. The Second World War began with the attack on Poland on September 1, 1939, and the neighboring German country was completely conquered within 4 weeks. Since medical personnel were urgently needed during the war, Mengele was drafted as a doctor in June 1940 and completed medical training during the year. He volunteered for the Waffen-SS and, when the Soviet Union was attacked, went into service with the notorious SS division Waffen-SS, which was held responsible for serious massacres of the Jewish population. Mengele was active as a medic on the Eastern Front for almost 2 years until he was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau on May 24, 1943. To this day, it cannot be clearly clarified under what circumstances the camp doctor came to Auschwitz, but it is extremely likely that Mengele came to the camp out of self-interest. The concentration camp inmates offered doctors the opportunity to conduct their research on living people. The experiments were also funded by the state. There is a theory that the transfer was orchestrated by Verschuer. This is supported by the fact that twin research was the professor's specialty, which had a strong focus in Mengele's Auschwitz experiments, but no absolutely clear evidence for this could be found. Despite numerous accusations after the war, Verschuer was never brought to justice. Most prisoners arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau by train and were herded into the camp from an unloading ramp. A selection took place there in which people who were unable to work were sorted out and led to the gas chambers to be murdered. Most of these were children, women, old people, or sick people. Family members were brutally separated and mothers were deprived of their children. Any form of humanity was missing. In some cases, entire transports were sent directly to the gas chamber without any selection. An estimated 900,000 people were murdered immediately after their arrival and burned in the adjacent crematoria. During his time in Auschwitz, Josef Mengele was an integral part of the selections. Eyewitnesses reported that the camp doctor even insisted on carrying out as many selections as possible. Mengele's approach was extremely emotionless and cynical. He only looked at the people for a moment and sent them to their death by gassing with a quick movement of his hand. When selecting around 90 children from Lithuania, the camp doctor set up a 1.50-meter high wooden frame and simply gassed every child who was not yet tall enough to hit it with his head. During the selections, Mengele smiled at those doomed to death, whistled various tunes and gave the impression that he was having fun. Mengele also regularly carried out selections in the camp itself, during which he went from barrack to barrack and simply pointed to the prisoners who were to be gassed. Mengele personally sent several 10,000 people to the gas chambers, although according to some estimates more than 100,000 deaths are possible. After his arrival in Auschwitz-Birkenau, Mengele was the head camp doctor of the so-called Gypsy camp. Until August 1944, a separate section of the camp where Sinti and Roma were interned. From the beginning, the camp doctor prevented attempts to improve the medical situation of the prisoners and worked to ensure that as few medications as possible were delivered to the camp section. Sick people were often simply sent to the gas chamber. Mengele sometimes had entire barracks containing several hundred people gassed if an infectious disease had spread in them. The so-called Gypsy camp was forcibly disbanded in August 1944, and all remaining people were gassed. Mengele was a big supporter of this cruel action. During his time in Auschwitz-Birkenau, Josef Mengele carried out various cruel human experiments in which thousands died in agony. During the selection, twins were specifically sorted out, but the camp doctor was told in advance that they would have to serve as his guinea pigs. For example, Mengele had them infected with diseases in order to compare the outbreak in both. If one child died, the other was usually murdered personally by the camp doctor so that both could be autopsied at the same time. Josef Mengele carried out surgical operations on twins without anesthesia, amputated limbs or removed organs, sometimes even while the victims were conscious. Mengele's study had shelves full of jars containing organs and limbs from his victims. A witness later reported on one of the camp doctor's murderous actions in a workroom next to the dissection room, waiting, crying bitterly, and not saying a word to us. Dr. Mengele prepared 2 syringes. He put IV-pan from one box and chloroform from another operating table. Then they brought in the first twin. It was a 14-year-old girl. Dr. Mengele ordered me to undress the girl and place her on the dissection table. After that, he injected Ivipan into her right arm. He palpated the left ventricle and injected the chloroform. After a single twitch, they took it to the morgue. In this way, all 14 twins were killed that night. Mengele once had a dispute with other camp doctors because he had a different diagnosis about the clinical picture of a pair of twins when they were 7 years old. Mengele insisted that both had tuberculosis. Then he came back after an hour and announced, "Yes, I dissected it." It actually wasn't tuberculosis due to a minor disagreement. He had simply shot the 2 small children himself and dissected the still warm bodies. In Auschwitz, Mengele worked on a way to change the color of people's eyes, preferably giving brown-eyed people blue eyes, which corresponded to the Nazis' racist worldview. The camp doctor usually dripped fluids into children's eyes, whereupon they began to fester and swell. Many of the victims died within the next few days, although Mengele was unable to obtain medical results. An eyewitness later reported, "Once I happened to be in his room and saw the children getting some liquid in their eyes. Their eyes became huge. A few days later I saw the same children dead in a mortuary barracks." Such experiments were carried out by Dr. Mengele was in the camp every second or third day, particularly cruel. Mengele also regularly carried out selections in the camp itself, during which he went from barrack to barrack and simply pointed to the prisoners who were to be gassed. Mengele personally sent several 10,000 people to the gas chambers, although according to some estimates more than 100,000 deaths are possible. After his arrival in Auschwitz-Birkenau, Mengele was the head camp doctor of the so-called Gypsy camp. Until August 1944, a separate section of the camp where Sinti and Roma were interned. A witness later reported on one of the camp doctor's murders in a workroom next to the autopsy room, waiting, crying bitterly, and Dr. Mengele not saying a word to us. He prepared 2 syringes. From one box he put Ivipan, and from another chloroform on the operating table. Then they brought in the first twin, Bent, a 14-year-old girl. Dr. Mengele ordered me to undress the girl and lay her on the autopsy table. Then he injected Ivipan intravenously into her right arm. After the child had fallen asleep, he felt the left ventricle and injected the chloroform. After a single twitch, they took her to the morgue. In this way, all 14 twins were killed that night. Mengele once had a dispute with other camp doctors because he had a different diagnosis about the clinical picture of a pair of twins when they were 7 years old. Mengele insisted that both had tuberculosis. Then he came back after an hour and announced, "Yes, I dissected it." It actually wasn't tuberculosis due to a minor disagreement. He had simply shot the 2 small children himself and dissected the still warm bodies. In Auschwitz, Mengele worked on a way to change the color of people's eyes, preferably giving brown-eyed people blue eyes, which corresponded to the Nazis' racist worldview. The camp doctor usually dripped fluids into children's eyes, whereupon they began to fester and swell. Many of the victims died within the next few days, although Mengele was unable to obtain medical results. An eyewitness later reported, "Once I happened to be in his room and saw the children getting some liquid in their eyes. Their eyes became huge. A few days later I saw the same children dead in a mortuary barracks." Such experiments were carried out by Dr. Mengele is in the camp every second or third day. He was particularly cruel to people with heterochromia, i.e., people with 2 different eye colors, who were usually killed immediately so that their eyes could be examined. He also sent several pairs of eyes to his mentor Otmar of Sakshua, which were examined by him. The professor knew the origin of these, but was never held accountable. Josef Mengele was also particularly interested in people of short stature who were separated out during the selection and placed in a separate storage area. The camp doctor carried out experiments on them almost every day, killing many by shooting them in the neck, and sending the bones to research institutes or exhibiting them. A survivor later reported the following: "We were given numerous injections into almost all of our organs, given medication, and subjected to cell-less blood samples. We were experimented on almost every day." Mengele personally supervised the experiments and was there almost every day to provide information, gave us instructions to the prison doctors. "Even though our living conditions were much better than those of the other prisoners, we experienced great mental torment because we knew that sooner or later we would be killed, and that our skeletons would be placed in a biological museum on methods for the forced sterilization of people of undesirable ethnicities. For example, he injected acid into the fallopian tubes of women, asked men to become infertile using strong X-rays, or gave the people steroid hormones. Many of these tortures of human experimentation were carried out without anesthesia. People who survived were always gassed afterwards. As the Red Army advanced, the Auschwitz concentration camp was evacuated on January 17, 1945, and Mengele drove a car to the Gross-Rosen concentration camp, far to the west, where he briefly served as the head camp doctor. Shortly before the end of the war, the camp doctor escaped and, disguised as a uniformed soldier, joined a Wehrmacht squad that was interned by American soldiers in June 1945. Mengele was not identified as a member of the SS because he carried false papers and did not have the typical blood group tattoo. The war criminal was released after a short period of imprisonment and was able to go into hiding with various acquaintances. From October onwards, he worked as a temporary worker on a farm in the Munich area. During this time, the camp doctor followed the Nuremberg trials and other proceedings against Nazi war criminals, knew that he too could end up on the gallows, and decided to leave the country in the summer of 1948. The former camp doctor first took the train to Austria, crossed the Alps on foot towards Italy, and was able to get on a ship from Genoa to Argentina with false documents. Josef Mengele arrived in Buenos Aires on June 20, 1949, where he was financially supported by his family living in Germany, who had reported his death to the authorities in order to protect the war criminal. In 1953, his wife, who lived in Germany, divorced him, revealing that Josef Mengele was still alive. However, no arrest warrant was issued against him. Curiously, Mengele was able to apply for a passport in his real name at the German embassy in 1956. The war criminal even openly admitted that he had been living in the country with false documents since 1949. Despite this information, the authorities did not compare Mengele's name with the list of internationally wanted criminals on which the name was noted. In 1958, the writer Ernst Schnabel published a book about Anne Frank in which he said nobody knows where Dr. Mengele is, whether he died or whether he is still alive somewhere today. An anonymous reader then wrote to him saying that he was wanted and living in South America. Schnabel then filed a complaint, and the Freiburg Public Prosecutor's Office then issued an arrest warrant against Josef Mengele. Mengele was officially in the investigators' crosshairs. The former camp doctor then fled to Paraguay, which at the time was under a dictatorship that did not extradite citizens abroad. On May 11, 1960, Mossad agents kidnapped Holocaust deciphering expert, war criminal Adolf Eichmann, who was tried and hanged in Israel. Since Mengele was registered in Paraguay with his real name, he was afraid of suffering the same fate and fled to Brazil in October 1960. Josef Mengele was never caught in Brazil. He lived carefree in Sao Paulo for the next 17 years, even being visited by family members. On February 7, 1979, the former camp doctor suffered a stroke while on a beach vacation and drowned in the sea off the coast of Brazil. Initially forgotten after the war, Josef Mengele became the world's most wanted war criminal of the Nazi era in the 1970s, and has since represented the atrocities of the crimes committed in the concentration camps. Historians describe the camp doctor as an ice-cold cynic who saw his victims not as people, but as test subjects of no value for whom death played no role. For the war criminal, there was only his racial biology research, the progress of which he was prepared to have everyone and everything murdered. An almost completely cold and emotionless person could become a monster in the given environment. Josef Mengele never had to answer for his actions, but his name will continue to be associated with his heinous actions around the world for generations to come. If you want to see more videos like this, like and subscribe to the channel.